El Chapo was once the richest and most powerful man in Mexico, controlling the $1 billion in a lower cartel. But today he's locked inside a tiny cell in America's worst prison that he says is worse than death itself. 2,230 days. That's how long El Chapo has been in ADX Florence, the most brutal high-tech prison in the USA. No one has ever escaped. Many wonder how the inmates and guards treat El Chapo. Well, thanks to newly released letters written by El Chapo, we now know. In a letter to his lawyer, El Chapo says he is tortured 24 hours a day. He also says he suffers from headaches every day. According to El Chapo, he has not seen sunlight or breathed fresh air since entering the USA, also claiming he has not had a full night's sleep even once. But those aren't even the worst things El Chapo has to experience in ADX Florence, as El Chapo is said to get special treatment behind bars. And I don't mean that in a good way. The reason why is because of El Chapo's past, his money and power, and his previous escapes. Joaquin El Chapo Guzmán has been a billionaire since the 1990s, becoming the second richest narco of all time after Pablo Escobar. El Chapo founded the Sinaloa cartel with his partner in crime, Ismael El Mozamba. Before long, the Sinaloa cartel was making $3 billion annually, breaching every part of Mexico and even establishing bases in U.S. cities. One of the big reasons El Chapo is so isolated in ADX Florence is because he famously escaped prison twice already, with his first escape taking place on January 19, 2001. El Chapo was being held at Penta Grande prison in Mexico, known as Mexico's most secure prison. But thanks to El Chapo's massive wealth and power, he recruited various prison guards and other inmates. The corrupt guards and inmates sneaked El Chapo out of his cell in a laundry cart. Once the laundry cart was out of the prison, El Chapo escaped by car, disappearing into the mountains. The escape massively embarrassed Mexico, but 13 years later, El Chapo was captured once again after Mexican Marines arrested him at a luxury hotel. Following intelligence from the American DEA, 65 Marines raided the hotel before being sent to Alaplano, a notorious maximum security prison in Mexico. But before long, El Chapo would embarrass the Mexican government once again. On the 11th of July 2015, El Chapo could be seen pacing around in his cell before ducking down behind the shower area of his cell. After 25 minutes, he did not emerge. So, prison workers entered his cell. In the shower area, there was a large hole which led to a massive tunnel. The tunnel led to this building 1 mile away. The building and the tunnel had been specially built for the escape. The tunnel had lighting and air ventilation. El Chapo escaped by riding on the back of a motorbike that had been brought into the tunnel by the workers. The tunnel was the exact height of El Chapo sitting on a motorbike, enabling him to make a flawless escape. El Chapo clearly had help and likely bribed prison workers. Just listen to this security footage from the prison. Applause. You can clearly hear the construction sounds of the tunnel being built. However, none of the guards reported this, as they were likely paid or threatened by El Chapo to keep quiet. At this point, El Chapo was an international name and was worth a staggering $12 billion. It seemed like he was untouchable, but this would all change on the 8th of January 2016. El Chapo's hideout was raided by 17 elite Mexican special forces. The operation had been planned for 1 month. Locals had reported suspicious men going in and out of the house. The safe house was then bugged, and Mexican Marines heard El Chapo's men talking about the arrival of Grandma. The Marines suspected Grandma was code for El Chapo. When El Chapo arrived at the safe house, special forces moved in, taking out all of El Chapo's workers. But in true El Chapo style, he escaped using a secret tunnel under a bathtub. He then ran through sewers before emerging and stealing a civilian's car. This led to a statewide manhunt, and El Chapo was found 12 miles away. El Chapo tried one more time to bribe the Marines, offering them money or houses. When they rejected this, El Chapo tried to threaten them, saying, "If you don't let me go, you're all going to die." But the threats did not work. El Chapo was arrested, and this His worst nightmare became reality as he was quickly flown to the USA. As soon as he arrived in America, you could see the fear in his eyes as he realized there was no escaping this situation. Mexico's most powerful man had become powerless. He was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years just in case he comes back from the dead, I guess. On the 19th of July 2019, El Chapo was sent to ADX Florence, where his new life in his own miniature version of hell would begin. ADX Florence in Colorado is America's most secure and brutal prison, housing only the most evil criminals. ADX Florence was built in 1994 after inmates Thomas Silverstein and Clayton Fountain ended the lives of two prison guards at USP Marion in Illinois. After this, it was decided a new prison had to be built, one to house only the most violent and dangerous inmates. Today, ADX Florence houses 357 inmates, all of whom are too dangerous to be in a normal prison, including, of course, El Chapo. In a recent letter, El Chapo said his life in the Supermax prison is worse than death. He spends 23 hours per day in his cell, being allowed to walk in a circle in a slightly larger room for just 1 hour per day. When El Chapo is moved to this room, he is in shackles and handcuffs, ensuring there is a 0% chance he can escape. El Chapo is allowed to exercise or walk around in the concrete room, which he does to maintain some sanity. As a billionaire, El Chapo is used to the finest foods. But in ADX Florence, the food is basic, functional, and repetitive. It's designed to keep inmates alive rather than provide any enjoyment. For breakfast, they're given milk, bread, and powdered eggs. And for lunch and dinner, they get processed meat, beans, and rice. These are mass-treated and are delivered through their solid steel cell doors. There's no commissary in ADX Florence, meaning El Chapo's money is worthless behind bars. But what's El Chapo's cell actually like? El Chapo spends 23 hours per day in a 7-foot x 12T cell. There is a bed, desk, and a stool, which are all made from concrete. Apart from that, there is a stainless steel sink toilet combo that can only be flushed once at a time. This is to ensure inmates can't drown themselves. There is also a tiny shower which is also on a timer. There is a tiny window measuring 4 in wide and 42 in tall. The window is angled towards the sky, preventing inmates from knowing their exact location within the prison, meaning it's impossible for El Chapo to plan an escape as he has no idea where he even is. Even if he somehow did leave his cell, he wouldn't get far. There are pressure pads all over the complex, meaning every footstep is tracked. There are motion detectors and cameras. The prison has over 1,400 remote-controlled steel doors. Every cell is watched over by guards 24 hours a day, meaning El Chapo has zero privacy. ADX also has what's known as the red button. If a guard presses this, the entire prison will lock down, automatically closing every door. On the outside, there are two 12-OT razor wire fences surrounding the prison's perimeter. There are also armed guards in watchtowers who are authorized to fire on sight at anyone trying to escape. ADX Florence has 6 levels of security. El Chapo is held in what's known as Unit H, the most secure and restrictive unit. Because of this, El Chapo is not allowed any family visits. He's also not allowed a full night's sleep as guards wake him up by banging on his cell door. El Chapo gets no human contact all day. Inmates are not allowed to speak to one another and inmates are not allowed to speak to guards. The cells are even soundproofed, meaning inmates can't even yell to one another. Just imagine going years without any meaningful conversation. That's what inmates in ADX Florence have to face. So there is no way El Chapo can escape. There's only one way El Chapo could ever escape prison in the USA. That is if he was transferred out of ADX Florence and moved to a lower security prison. However, this is extremely unlikely as most inmates in ADX are never allowed out. Once you're in for life. Bert El Chapo may soon have company in ADX Florence. Ismael Elmo Zamba was kidnapped and taken to the USA. Elmo was the co-founder of Mexico's Sinaloa cartel, which he ran for decades alongside El Chapo, but they're now both in U.S. custody. On the 18th of August 2025, Elmo agreed to plead guilty. He too will likely be sent to ADX Florence, but in a unit nowhere near El Chapo. However, the Mexican government is asking for Elmo back, saying that he was illegally kidnapped from Mexico by El Chapo's own son, who is not in custody himself, as he made a deal with U.S. law enforcement. Mexico has now charged El Chapo's son with high treason, leading to some saying the Mexican government may be trying to protect Elmo. But it's unlikely Elmo will leave the USA and will almost definitely be sent to ADX Florence, meaning that for Mexico's two most rich and powerful criminals, time has finally run out, and this time there will be no escape. Subscribe.